There's nothing like those coma sleeps. Got back from the Jackpot Ultras around 2 or something, and took care of business, getting things organized. And then I did that hour and a half pass out sleep where you wake up and you don't know where the hell you are. Of course, today is April 25th, and it's the 1 year anniversary of me going to the hospital, getting hospitalized. And I'd never been to the hospital. I made it to 57 and never gone to the hospital. But I spent a week not breathing. I kind of pulled up this little Fitbit data. You can see, I usually only get about 5 hours of sleep. And then look at that. I fell the beginning of March. It was okay. But then as April approached, I was having breathing issues and couldn't breathe. And then eventually got so bad the week before that I went into hospital on Friday. I wasn't sleeping almost at all for like 4 or 5 days. And then thankfully went to the hospital. They diagnosed me with congestive heart failure. I'm not sure exactly what was the diagnosis, but the good thing is when I went to the ER nurses realized what was going on. I had fluid retention, and they gave me Lasix, and I peed away like 22 pounds of water in less than 24 hours. And you know what? I could breathe. Now, I think what happened was I fell, and for 4 or 5 weeks, I wasn't able to walk at all. And I will usually walk, if you follow me, 2 or 3 hours a day for decades. And I think my body just kind of went out of whack, much like a astronaut does when they're in the weightlessness of space. And so, unfortunately, when I was in the hospital, they just see, old fat guy, and they think immediately that I had heart disease and all these kind of things. And it was interesting when I went to the hospital. It kind of drove me nuts that you go in, you give them, I go in, I give them my medical progress, that kind of thing, and then they write it all down, and then you have to give it to the admitting nurse, and then when the ER nurses come, they ask you questions, and so you end up answering it 2 or 3 times. And I don't have a history of heart disease myself or in my family. Yeah, I'm always been big, but I've been pretty healthy throughout my life. All my relatives lived to their high 90s, so I'm saying no to almost everything they're asking. And then of course, when I have the ER doctor, they immediately don't read the chart and act like, and they say, you've had heart disease, you've had a heart attack, you've had this. I'm like, no, I haven't had that. Had 2 cardiologists at the hospital also just make assumptions, not read my chart. And after the first 5 or 6 questions, I realized they didn't read my chart, and I called them on it. So that was kind of an experience. So here you can kind of see the heart rate data. Probably if I turn it like this, I'm not sure how it shows up. But, this is this past year, which has been kind of, my heart rate's just been going up. But what happened here was early March, I got the COVID shot, and my heart rate and sleep got messed up. But if you scroll from last year, look at that. I fell in March, and that peak was just when I went to the hospital a year ago. It just skyrocketed my heart rate. That was my resting heart rate was almost 80, in the high 70s, 80s before I ended up making the call and going to the hospital. In fact, my wife, of course, and I'm sure many women are like this, they know how us adult men don't want to go see the doctor. But I actually made the appointment for urgent care, showed up at urgent care. They thought I had some kind of blood clot, and so that scared us. And then I ended up in the ER. And ended up having to spend a day or 2 in the hospital because of COVID. And they're like, well, if you want these tests, you got to stay here. And, the nurses and their staff are great, but the doctors, like I said, once again, just not a fan of doctors. And so that was the story. Kind of weird being in Vegas at a race the year after ended up with this diagnosis. It's been a tough year in terms of training and stuff. I'm on these medications. You don't know if it's old age. As I talk about often, 2019 was a rough year for me. Mentally, I dropped out of a lot of races. And then, of course, 2020 was hard for everybody, obviously, with COVID. But for me, I'd never been injured, and that was definitely crazy. So on with today's data. You can see my mileage. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I did 10 miles wandering around there at the race. But I did drive home today. The heart rate, I would like to get it back down in the low 50s for that average resting heart rate, but it's just not cooperating. But you can see today, there I walked at the beginning with the gesture for a 10K, and he really hammered me, and then he also hammered me even just doing a mile. And thankfully, he was going so slow, unfortunately, overall, when he had to take a lot of rest, that he's going to have to finish up tomorrow, and I had to be back on tonight. So I found him a ride, and he's out there, and he's going to finish it. It's going to be a long day and long night. So that's kind of the story on that. Sleep, thankfully, I actually, as it shows, I got 5 hours of sleep, but it's been a weird sleep. I slept last night from 11 to 3:30 in the morning. That's when I woke up and went and walked with Ed at 4:30. And then, like I said, I had that coma sleep from 4:30 to 6:30 this evening. So that was so nice. But look at Saturday. I didn't have an Airbnb. I slept an hour and a half in the car, kind of. And that wasn't good. And then, of course, Friday, I went to bed at 9, and I had to get up and take the Jester to the race. So kind of crazy sleep. Didn't get too much. So workouts, of course. Yeah, look at that. You can tell, like, I did the 10K with him. Wasn't too bad. But just doing that one last mile with him definitely was hard. And it's amazing. He was at mile 250 for the week. And, yeah, but that's partly, the whole thing I've been doing with this, kind of the medication and my age and the heart issues. And it's interesting, a lot of these people in the ultra world all know me, and I think they just don't really realize how serious what happened to me was, and that I'm not my former self. But, I know that's one of the things I was having issues with in 2019 were expectations, and I still have that. And, of course, it's expectations in my own head as well. And then, of course, just kind of go here, and looks like my form's good, so I need to find a race, 33. And, so you can see, did the Jester walking around 18:13 pace, and that's with a bunch of stops at aid stations and stuff. So I was pretty happy. And then that mile was a quick mile for me. I'm just a walker now. And speaking of races, let me pull up here. This is probably the race I'm going to do, the Great Virtual Race Across Tennessee. I did it last year. So last year I went into the hospital on April 25th, got out a couple days later, I think on the 27th. Like I said, I had to stay there, which was a huge mistake. But they wanted to do like these echographs and all kinds of fancy tests. And I said, hey, during COVID, who knows when we'll be able to do these tests in a regular doctor's office. You're here. The thing that was interesting when I was in the hospital for the first time, because of COVID, there wasn't a lot of patients in there because they were only taking people for COVID. But the other bad part was I felt like, I was completely isolated, couldn't have friends and family there. And I think the staff, especially the doctors, kind of took advantage of a lot of patients and kind of just bullying you around and stuff. And, if you know me, I, of course, didn't. I got a couple of the doctors pretty pissed off at me, especially the one lady who, just walked out threw her hands in the air. Because, when I was there, they said my ejection fraction was in the teens. Normal is 50, 60. Okay is 50. Bad is 40. And 30 is really bad. Of course, months later, I finally found a good doctor, who actually came into my room when he first saw me and read my chart in front of me, not just making assumptions based on what I look like. And then looked at my Fitbit data and realized, like, okay, you're doing all this, so you're definitely not exactly what's going on. And when he measured my ejection fraction, it was in the 30s. And then a couple months ago, it was in the 40s. I will be seeing him tomorrow and be talking to him probably on the Zoom. Haven't done a test, but things are going well. So long story is, to get myself motivated last year, I decided to sign up for the virtual race across Tennessee with Laz. It's 1,000 kilometers. It's actually longer than that. So people who stopped at 1,000K actually didn't get a finish because it was like a 20K longer, because the borders of Tennessee are not 1,000 kilometers exactly. It's amazing how people got all butthurt because they didn't read the damn directions and rules. In fact, I got to read these things from Laz sometime. His frequently asked questions is absolutely hilarious. So I did that, but I ended up setting a goal for myself. You had to do like 5.3 miles to race across Tennessee in 4 months. I decided to do the double. It was the Rat was race across Tennessee, and then the Bat was back across Tennessee. And I had to do 10.6 miles, and it was pretty rough going the first month or so. I was unable to walk more than about 3 miles an hour, 21, 22-minute miles. So I was out there for 4 or 5 hours a day getting it done, but I finally rounded into shape, and I did the race across Tennessee and the back across Tennessee. So I'm going to sign up for it again. It was good motivation. I know my friend Adam also did it and helped him get in great shape so that he finally got his Western States Lottery qualifier at Black Canyon's 100K. So I highly recommend doing it, and it was definitely fun. So it's back in more than ever, and supporting Feeding America and a doggy thing. So the great virtual race against around with the dogs. So that is the plan. Thank you guys for all listening. And as always, stay healthy, be boring.